Hi there, my name is Adi Sedgwick and I'm an educational psychologist at Bradford Local Authority. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the bite-sized version of the training supporting early literacy through direct vocabulary instruction during story time. Now, the first thing that I'd like to do is just give you a little bit of background as to where this training has come from. Before training as an educational psychologist, I was a secondary school teacher for 20 years and I qualified as an EP just over 12 months ago. Now, the topic for my thesis was very much looking at the role of the educational psychologist in supporting young people who have got difficulties with speech, language and communication. More specifically, my thesis was very much interested in looking at children who have got problems with receptive and expressive language. Now, the reason for my choice was, first of all, the prevalence of speech and language difficulties. I've got some statistics there. Basically, we can see that up to 50% of young people in areas of social deprivation will have some kind of receptive or expressive language difficulty. More worryingly, 2/3 of those get missed because identifying language difficulties is notoriously difficult. Language difficulties are comorbid with cognitive development, literacy development, and also social, emotional, and mental health. So if a language need isn't supported, then there will be further repercussions. So basically, theoretically, as an educational psychologist, I could say that all needs could potentially be related to a language difficulty, and it always, therefore, forms part of my hypothesis formulation when I'm working with schools to try and identify what the specific needs of a young person may be. So, going back to my thesis and where this training has come from, I had to write 3 journal articles for my thesis. And the first one was a systematic review of school-based mainstream oral language interventions for Key Stage 1 children. And basically what that means is I had to do a massive search through all of the evidence base and the millions of journals that are out there to try and find high quality studies that were looking at the school-based mainstream oral language. Now, the reason why this was important is because the majority of children with these language difficulties will be taught in the mainstream setting. I narrowed it down to Key Stage 1 children because it's at this point in a child's education that things become very formal. We start trying to teach them basic reading and writing skills. Anyway, within my systematic review, there were 10 studies that were included, and 6 of those studies came from North America, and they very much focused on vocabulary development to support the early literacy through the shared storybook reading. All of these 6 studies had significantly positive results, which were at least medium in terms of their effect size. There was also a range of quality first teaching and targeted support for children identified at risk of academic failure. And by academic failure, they meant at risk of finding it really difficult to develop those early literacy skills. But comparing whether it was targeted support or more universal, the pedagogy was pretty much the same. So, what's the evidence which tells us why language is so important for early literacy? Well, first of all, language supports abstract thinking and it's critical to cognitive development. And that makes sense because if we're to develop our higher order thinking, we quite often need that sophisticated language that's part of our internal dialogue. Also, it's early oral competencies, especially the depth of vocabulary knowledge and your narrative skills that promote reading proficiency. And again, that makes sense. If you have a wide vocabulary and you're capable of putting together a detailed narrative, then your reading is going to be a lot more fluent. Also, the ability to form complex sentences is going to improve a child's standard of written English. You don't have to be an educational psychologist to work out that if you can't say it, then you're going to really struggle to be able to write it down. Interestingly as well, it's a child's language skills at 5 that's the most important predictor for reaching expected levels in both literacy and numeracy. So that means having a language difficulty is a higher risk factor than the links to poverty or the links to low levels of parental education. Also, phonological awareness and developing vocabulary in the early years really support kids to acquire those basic reading skills, which then makes them more able readers when they get to be in age 7. So, the studies from America that were looking very much at developing vocabulary through shared storybook reading were all based on this one publication called Bringing Words to Life. It's a book by Isabel Beck. This one here on the right is the old edition, and I managed to get myself a copy for £1 off eBay. The new edition is out. And this is a really lovely book, and it's not a hard read. I probably read it in about an hour, and it just really talks about working with children to just help them develop a love for language and words. So, in terms of helping support young people develop their vocabulary through this enjoyment of stories, what Beck and her colleagues are saying is they are suggesting a tiered structure in terms of vocabulary, Tier 1, Tier 2 and Tier 3. So just so that you're familiar with the language that I'm using, Tier 1 are high frequency basic words like boy, like girl, like house. A Tier 3 word is a low frequency domain specific word. So I'm an ex-science teacher in a secondary school. So a domain specific word might be something like atom or electron. And you would only really teach these words in context on a needs to know basis. Now, Tier 2 words are high frequency if you are a proficient language user. And they're found across a range of domains. And the theory behind what I'm talking about is that if we support young people to develop their Tier 2 vocabulary, then this will really support not only their expressive vocabulary in their language, but also they'll become more proficient in terms of their literacy skills. So I'm just going to give you some examples of what I mean by a Tier 2 word. And I've taken some Tier 1 words. I've taken the word big, which is Tier 1, and I've converted it into a Tier 2 word, which means the same, but it's not a basic word, like gigantic. Minuscule is a Tier 2 word, which comes from the Tier 1 word small. Ecstatic from happy, miserable from sad. So, what Beck was saying is that the rich knowledge of Tier 2 words can have a powerful impact on oral fluency because of the significant role they play in their language users' repertoire. Thus, directing instruction towards Tier 2 words during shared storybook reading with younger children can be the most productive way to extend their vocabulary and therefore improve reading comprehension. So, within the article that I wrote and the 6 studies that I talked about earlier, there was a lot of talk about comparing extended instruction of the Tier 2 words to embedded instruction. Now, embedded just means that as a teacher is reading a storybook to the children and a Tier 2 word crops up in the story, then they will just explain the meaning of the word whilst they're telling the story. Extended instruction, however, allocates more instructional time per word through various activities where the young people can get to use the words within a variety of contexts. So it's unsurprising that results from extended instruction is a more refined understanding of the target words compared to the embedded instruction. Now, the effectiveness of the extended instruction is improved by including specific tasks around these three areas. First of all, morphological awareness tasks, and this just means taking a tier 2 word and playing with it and changing its meaning slightly by maybe adding an S to make it plural or ed to make it a past tense. Phonological awareness tasks, I'm going to show you some examples of in a minute, and also the explicit teaching of compound words, and again I'm going to show you some examples. So, in terms of phonological awareness tasks, it's very much around the listening here, where we're giving young people the opportunities to start identifying sounds and generating words that might start or end with target sounds. Also, another listening task, which is the phoneme segmentation. Segment 2, 3 and 4 phoneme words use clapping or moving counters so that young people, before they actually start reading, get this sense of the sounds that make up words and also the number of syllables. Blending phonemes together to form target words is also another example of a phonological awareness task. And although this last one with the stars isn't a listening task, if the young people that you are working with are able to access this, then it's a really nice game to play. So it's that very basic phoneme, grapheme awareness. So easy games changing sad to pad to pat, harder games changing duck to lock to block, etc. And this can be done on whiteboards. And here are some examples of compound words. So a compound word is basically one word that's made from two smaller words that bring the meaning. So a rowboat is a boat that obviously you row with oars. A coffee pot is a pot that you brew coffee in. Colourful. Colour, we know what it means. Full means colour everywhere. A more abstract compound word is everywhere. So every being the number of things that were in a particular class and where their proximity. So if there was butterflies everywhere, if there was flowers everywhere, then there will be lots and lots of them within a close proximity. Also, the studies that were part of my thesis, and again, this isn't rocket science, talked about the need for review. So if we want the young people that we're working with to maintain the knowledge of the new vocabulary and tier 2 words that they've learnt, then we need to have lots and lots of repetition and opportunities for review. And what the studies were saying was that semantic review results in a higher level of word learning compared to embedded review. And again here, embedded means the same as before, where we will be reviewing the word, but just through rereading the story. Whereas semantic review would mean reviewing the tier 2 words that had been learnt, but in a range of contexts. Some really tentative evidence as well from the systematic review that I did suggested that targeted support or small group interventions consisting of 3 weekly sessions of at least 30 minutes for 12 weeks should be enough to support longer-term retention of the language skills and the vocabulary for the children in need of additional support. However, I would suggest that these sorts of activities are things that you just try and embed within your curriculum. All of the research that I was looking at as part of my thesis was geared towards Key Stage 1 age group, but there's no reason why the techniques that I'm going to show you in a moment can't be used beyond Key Stage 1, as long as you're using a storybook which is at the age-appropriate levels for the children that you're working with. So, this bite-sized video really is to try and whet your appetites to come on the full training events. This is going to be on WebEx and it will be a 3-hour session. The first one's on Wednesday the 11th of November and the second is on Wednesday the 24th. However, I would just like to share with you an example that I will be going through in more depth at these particular events, just really so that it will give you an example or an exemplar to think about what I've just talked about and see how it can be put into practice. So I'm going to just stop sharing this PowerPoint. You're going to have to bear with me because I'm a bit of a numpty when it comes to making videos. So share content, new document. I'm hoping you can see that. So when I first started developing activities based around the research that came from my thesis, I asked one of my Key Stage 1 teachers to tell me what her favourite Key Stage 1 storybook was, and she said that she really loved Lost and Found by Oliver Jeffers. So what I did is I took that storybook and I typed out the text, and from that I identified 3 different types of word. So I identified some tier 2 words, I identified some compound words, and I also identified some quite simple basic words which I could use to support the children with the phonological awareness tasks. And what I found was there was a bit of a dearth of tier 2 words, so I actually introduced my own by taking the tier 1 word there, sad, and converting it to the word miserable. I'm just going to show you here. Again, I did the same here. I took the tier 1 word and I converted it to minuscule. We've got 2 compound words here. So from that one storybook, I've generated a list of words that I can use for my contextual phonological awareness tasks. I've generated 4 tier 2 words, which are going to be target words that I'm going to specifically teach the young people that I'm working with. And I've identified 2 compound words, which again, I'm going to have as target words, and they're going to be explicitly taught. Now, I'm just going to stop sharing this content with you as well, because the last thing that I do want to show you is a draft script. Okay, now this is a draft script that I wrote, and I'm not saying it's brilliant. I'm a secondary science teacher by training, so the chances are that the people who are watching this video have a lot more expertise than I do with regards to doing these sorts of activities with Key Stage 1 or primary age children. But it's split into 3 sessions. So session 1, all 3 sessions will start with some phonological awareness tasks. And it will be using the words identified from the story to do some fun games that are all about developing the phonological awareness of the children. Now, here I've got the 3 stars. The original research focused on speaking and listening tasks because children can understand much more sophisticated language orally than they can access through text. So therefore, the theory is to take advantage of children's listening and speaking competencies to enhance their vocabulary development without reading, writing proficiency getting in the way. But obviously, you can make a professional decision on whether you think the early reading and writing task will be a good thing to do. After the phonological awareness games, it's time for the embedded instruction. So it's basically a read-through of the story where you would introduce 2 of the tier 2 target words. So in this case, miserable and delighted. Some instructions for embedded instruction here. reading through again, asking the kids to listen for the words. You can read that at your leisure. Now, in terms of extended instruction, what I've done is given some suggestions for ways in which those tier 2 target words that you've introduced just now, being miserable and delighted, opportunities to use those words and play with those words and apply them to different contexts. Within your extended instruction, we need to be including some morphological awareness tasks in terms of playing with the words, changing their tenses, using plurals, making plurals. So we've got some examples here. And I'm assuming that you will be able to pause the video so that you can have a read through. So, within session 2, the first thing that you're going to do is retrieval of those tier 2 words that you've already looked at, rehearse using them again, some phonological awareness tasks very similar to those completed in the previous session. And then we're going to go through the same process again with the embedded and extended instruction, but this time we're going to be introducing 2 different tier 2 words. We'll have the morphological awareness tasks. We're also introducing a new compound word. And then session 3 will be a consolidation of all the new words that the young people have been introduced to in session 1 and 2. So that will be the 4 tier 2 words and the 2 compound words. So if you do decide to join me in the full version of the course, what will be happening is that I will be asking delegates to bring with them a storybook of their choice, and we can work through it together. So it will be a very practical, hands-on course where you will produce your own script based on the storybook that you have brought with you. Also, you will be given copies of this draft script that's based on Lost and Found, although I'm guessing that you'll be able to access it via this short video. So, thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful, and I very much hope that I might meet you in the longer sessions.